Welcome to this Be Better podcast, where strategy, continuous improvement, innovation, leadership, and organizational development are the pillars that drive success. In every episode, seasoned professionals share their insights, proven methodologies, and powerful tools to help you grow both personally and professionally. At Be Better, we are dedicated to your continuous improvement journey. Know better, do better, and be better. So listen, learn, apply, and unleash your potential. Well, I'm very excited today because I'm here with the one and only Jennifer Katongole. Wow, such a pleasure to
Thank
be
you.
here with you.
Thank you, Carlos. It's very exciting to do this. We've talked about this for a long time, haven't we? So now we're making it happen.
Yeah, I'm excited, especially in this season in your life where
Mm.
you moved from the US to Uganda. So,
Yes.
so you've been in Uganda for how long? Only a few days?
Yeah, we've been back here 1 month now. So we moved back beginning of August. So good to be settling in and into our new rhythms. So yeah.
Well, as you know, I do this podcast in Spanish, and this is going to be the first season I'm doing it in English. So I thought about,
Great.
hey, I need to invite Jennifer Katongole to be the first one. So I'm very excited.
Thank you. It is an honor to be the first. So
Yeah. And well, we're going to jump in because we have a lot of things to cover and learn from you. And so when I met you, it was 2 years ago. I knew you have a heart for continuous improvement. But I was wondering, is this something that you recognize at some point? I don't know, maybe when you were younger, a certain
mm,
passion for continuous improvement. Can you tell us a bit
yes.
about that?
Yeah, that is a very good question. And I feel like a lot of people that I meet in continuous improvement are similar, where they kind of know that like all their life they've been someone who just wants to make things better. They don't want to just do the routine, same old, same old. So if I can like pick out one formative moment, I would say when I was in eighth grade, so 14-ish, I had the opportunity to pick a project to do for the year. And I really felt that our orientation for the new sixth graders coming into the building could be better. So I told my teacher, like, we should improve this. And so I had a whole project plan. I totally redesigned the day. Like, I didn't just want an hour tour, I wanted a half day tour. I wanted them to sit in classes, go to lunch, have big buddies. We printed out maps, we printed out pictures of the teachers' faces they could take home. And they all agreed to it. I don't like, as an adult now, I realize how much that teacher went to bat for me as a 14-year-old. But
Uh,
my elementary school, then those fifth graders got to experience this revised orientation to sixth grade. And we did, feedback survey and everything. So I could see the results. Now, I don't know if that stuck, if they, kept the new onboarding the next year. But yeah, that I think is like the biggest thing where I can look back and say, like, oh, this has been going on a long time.
wow, you never told me this story. So that's
Not? Oh,
fascinating
yeah.
that you
Mm-hmm.
have that in your heart since you
Yep.
were little. So that's great. It's interesting. Fast forward,
Mm,
when I met you, was it like 2 years ago?
mm.
I remember I moved from a World Vision, which is a big organization, to a smaller organization, Medical Teams International. That's where we met, and you were working for Trudy, who
Yes.
she's a leader who's very passionate about continuous improvement. And people told me, well, Jennifer Katongole is working in human resources with a lot of improvements. And that's when we met. Why don't you tell us a bit about what were you doing? What were some of the challenges you were trying to tackle when you were in human resources?
Yeah, very much so. No, I feel very thankful that I landed in Trudy's department and that she already had the vision, that you had good leadership support. Um, and actually, I actually started my journey with medical teams in Medical Teams Uganda. So I first worked for HR here as a consultant and did different process mapping and different volunteer management and developing our standards for that. And then when I moved to the HQ side of things in in Trudy's department, as you said, then I was a staff recruiter. And so a lot of our work there was making sure that we had SOPs, we had workflows, we had template emails. So that way, every candidate, every hiring manager, every panel member got the same level of service, no matter what recruiter they had. And that was really important to us. So I came in and there was a pretty good foundation set. I didn't have to work with the team from scratch. But definitely we were able to build that up into something that, could just run like clockwork. And then I think maybe like lots of us in continuous improvement, when you are just doing the same thing, you can, maybe get a little bit bored. And so my boss always knew like I'm looking for a challenge. And so what we determined was that, we had kind of sorted a lot of things on the recruitment side of HR, but the same hadn't been done yet in the HR operations side. And so I was tasked to lead a 6-month project with the team to really document all our processes, refine them if they needed to be improved, and kind of, get that part running smoothly as well. So I remember meeting you. I don't know if you remember this, but I think my word I use is like I'm floundering, if you remember that.
Yes.
Because I knew like, okay, there's like 30 processes we need to go through. I need to have a repeatable process to analyze each one, figure out what we already have for documentation. Does that process really work? Where are the gaps? How do we improve it? I was like, there should be something I can do for each one of these. And I remember in that call, you're like, do you know DMAIC? And I was like, what's DMAIC? And then you told it to me, and I was like, oh, this is the best thing ever. Like this is it. And that like unlocked everything. And so yeah, ever since then, like that is the framework which I have in my head whenever there's problem solving. So thank you for that, Carlos, because I probably could have got it done, but I had a much better path having you tell me about DMAIC. So thank you.
Yeah, which is interesting because you're talking about the process of continuous improvement, which a lot of people, they just think about improving things and what is the process to fix things, but you were thinking really about, but there should be a process on how to improve things, and that's when you discover. And the other thing it's always very interesting is that especially in this type of organizations we work, humanitarian nonprofits, it always feels like we are behind when it comes to the tools and the methodologies and things. So it's great that people with your mindset and your heart are the ones who incorporate these ideas and expand those ideas into, bigger improvements for those type of organizations, which you did, because I think what I feel very blessed is seeing your growth in this area over the years, and how like from human resources, which it was a big deal for the organization, but then there was the need to have some of the things you were doing for international programs, which is kind of like the core of Medical Teams International when it comes to working closely with the country offices. So what did you discover when you move, and what are some of the improvement projects you've been working in that area?
Yeah, very good question. Very good question. So having been around medical teams, I of course knew of the international programs department. But then once you get in it, you start to actually understand it much better. And so I really grasped it is a nexus department. So it is kind of, if you pictured like overlapping circles, it's the center of where country offices and HQ support departments and donors, like institutional donors, they all overlap and mix with international programs. So as we work on processes, I found it's really quite rare that you would develop or work on a process that is just within our team. Usually there's other stakeholders either in the HQ side or on the country office side or on both sides. And so I think different to work in HR where some of the processes were that way, but some were just very much only the HR staff executed them. It takes a lot more collaboration and a lot more intentionality of timing and figuring out readiness for other departments to work on processes, because it could be high priority to us, but the other departments also have to have bandwidth to contribute. And if you don't include them, then you never really come up with good solutions, and those systemic issues just kind of continue to go on. So, for example, one of the things that we knew was a friction point, I would say, over the years is how our international programs and marketing and development teams work together because that team needs stories, updates from what's happening in our programs. And it just never felt like the information flowed like it should. So we did a Kaizen with 5 people from international programs and 5 people from marketing development. And it was really just lovely to have people understand each other. And I think that's like so much what I appreciate about going through continuous improvement processes is you see the understanding, the assumptions that both sides had, like, oh, we just assumed like that your internal process was ticked and tied and working. And then you find out like, oh no, we have major gaps on our side too. Like we don't talk to each other. You think we're talking to each other, but we don't. So no wonder we can't even tell you certain things. And so what came out of that was a really robust action plan for the next year, where essentially they're going to run multiple DMAIC cycles on parts of those processes to say, what is working about this? What's critical quality? What's the customer need? Are we getting that? How can we design workflows that work? So yeah, I think it was really a good turning part for our departments. And it took a long time. I've actually working virtually done a lot of disaggregated Kaizens, which it's funny when I meet other continuous improvement professionals who get to work in an office or in a manufacturing facility, like they never have to do that. They can just, get in a room in 1 week. And I was like, oh no, I very rarely have a whole week together. So we were meeting, 2 hours at a time every week, every 2 weeks. We actually had to take a pause for a while. So it took several months to get to our conclusions. But it was really good when we did finally get there.
Mm,
So that's one of them. Mhm.
well, and you're making me think about over the years I've been challenged to say,
Mm,
well, is continuous improvement also, does it work for humanitarian
mm,
organization and for, I don't know, financial organization and health organization? But actually, I think that the organizations that are not manufacturing need continuous improvement probably the most because
mm.
you're working with processes that they're dealing with information. And so, to your point about the example, it's really hard to see where the handoffs are of information, where there are
Yes.
gaps in information. And so, having a approach in continuous improvement where you can map things, you can see
Right.
how people are interacting with each other and
Right.
what type of information it's flowing, I think is very critical to be
Yeah.
efficient. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really good call out that a lot of it is information flows because one of the other big ones we worked on this year was our travel process. So when staff are traveling to
Mm,
country offices, you think of like, I think when we did that swim lane, there was maybe 17 lanes in a swim lane. It was insane. Like the number of people who need to know about this person's
mhm,
traveling, what do they need? Did they sign off? And so
mm,
realizing that we just didn't have a good systematic way of doing that. It was all emails like, oh, yep, we approve
mhm,
that. Oh, yep, book them at the hotel. And it's like, whoa, we got to get some things into the same funnel. So yeah,
mhm.
I think information is a really key piece of it.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you because we have a big need in medical teams
Mm,
for to improve our financial model. And I
yes.
remember that we started talking about that even at the beginning of the planning process. But it was difficult for many to visualize
Yeah.
how could a Kaizen approach could help to accomplish that. And in my mind, I thought, well, if you this is my basic premise of Kaizen. If you have the right people,
Mm,
you have the right leaders supporting that, you have the right facilitator, and then you have the commitment and you apply the tools, it's going to work.
yeah.
And so we needed a great facilitator. And there you go, Jennifer
Da,
Katongole.
da,
Da, da, da,
well,
da.
thank you for
And
putting my
that
name
that's a
forward.
and that's a big that was a big project, like just for people to know this is a like strategic, maybe one of the most important projects for medical teams. So, and what I would like for you to help me understand more is how do you live that as a facilitator? And
Mm,
also, I don't think a lot of people realize how challenging it is to do this virtually, but at the same time, how important it is to do it virtually. Could you speak
Right.
a little bit about that
Sure.
experience?
Yeah. So, if I was a, very strict CI professional, I would always make sure I have learning and reflection. And I don't always learn and reflect on all my CI things. But this one I did. I even like kept a journal of it. I had debrief sessions because I knew this one was going to challenge me and I would learn a lot from it. So just to set the scene, so this included, two members of our executive team, COO, CFO. It included a couple of country directors, and some finance staff and other directors in the organization. So all fairly high level people. So it had to happen virtually. We are across, I don't even know, like 8 time zones. So there was no way we were ever going to get in the room to talk about it. And I applaud the organization for also realizing like we do want that breadth of people. We want people in East Africa, we want people in Colombia. Like this should not just sit with purely the executive team. It should be cross-functional, which really lended to its strength. Um, so what we needed to do is say, hey, the funding atmosphere is getting tighter. We've seen, layoffs in other INGOs. We had our own layoffs. We need to understand our financial model. We need to understand where the gaps are in the financial model and how to make it stronger. And so the acronym for it was MEDIC. So I think that was like modeling economic direction for increased capacity. So Team
Mhm.
MEDIC met for these 2-hour sessions about every other week for many, many months. And it is very tricky, as you say, like A, to facilitate virtually, but B, to talk about something as kind of ethereal as a financial model. And I realized very quickly on we were using different language, and sometimes we're actually talking about the same things, but sometimes we're not
Mhm.
talking about the same
Mhm.
things, but we kind of all thought we were. And so a key learning for me in that was like, you have to write something down and be able to point
Mhm.
at it and be like, do we all agree to that? Is that what we are saying right now? So, like, the
Mhm.
phrase I like to use with people is give them something to point at. Because even if
Mhm.
it's virtual and you just throw it on a Word doc or a spreadsheet or virtual whiteboard,
Mhm.
then we can all say, like, yes, that's the problem statement. But then sometimes people are like, no, that's not the problem statement. That's way too
Mhm.
narrow. And you're like, okay, so we don't all agree. So, like, let's go into it again
Mhm.
and use our methodologies to kind of land things. So I think, it's human nature too to want to kind of move quickly with things. Like, let's just get to solutions. I think, particularly when you're working with executive leaders, they are used to making decisions. That is why people come to them a lot of times. So, like, we need the final answer. Give us the final answer. So, as a
Mhm.
facilitator, to slow all those people down to say, we aren't even talking about solutions like for weeks, that was
Mhm.
really tricky. And in the beginning, there was tons of like statements like, well, we need X, we need Y. Like, well, you're assuming that's the solution. Like, you're not maybe saying it that way, but it's, you're assuming root causes and everything. So we had to kind of slow them down and, formally walk through the DMAIC process. There was a point in it too where we kind of moved through DMAIC, and then someone spoke up and was like, I think we still haven't gotten to the core. Like, we've discovered a lot of really good things, but there's this core that's missing. So we actually had to go back in the cycle and say, okay, let's think about this. And that's when drawing really helped. We broke up into groups and we're really drawing out financial flows and understanding like, where does that breakdown happen? What could be better? In the end, what we realize is, because one of the phrases some people had said is, well, we need a new financial model. And by the end, we're like, no, we don't actually need a new financial model because we're still going to do the same things. We're still going to raise institutional funding, private funding. We're going to have site fees. We're still going to spend our money on the same things, staffing and medicine and whatever. But what we need is more standards and structure and governance around all those
Mhm.
things. We need metrics because right now, we know they happen, but there's not necessarily decision-making criteria for all those areas. And so that's what we're really now moving forward with in the action plan, is to say, let's put some structure on there. And then what support systems do you need in your finance and your budgeting process that can support all that? Um, so yeah, it's challenging, and I really applaud them because that takes humility too. I think anytime you go into a Kaizen process, for it to really work, you need to be humble. You need to be willing to listen to each other's. And like, there was times we definitely disagreed. Like, it was that there was some like tense moments. I in my journal there was one day I wrote like, I expected going into today to be tough, and it was. And so it's like, okay, well, glad I accurately assessed that. But because you're wrestling with very important things that we've got to make
Mhm.
sure we find a good solution for the organization. So
Mhm.
Yeah, so a lot of good learning there, and it can be done. You can use Kaizen even on a financial model. So
And I feel like we could almost spend one episode to dissect that experience. But I think I can speak about several things. But one I really like about you is you're brave in
hmm,
using the methodology and the continuous improvement tools, even in projects of this caliber. Because in my own experience, I sometimes feel that, well, if I bring this problem statement approach, they're not gonna like it. Or if I bring this cause and effect diagram, because they're top leaders, they're gonna. But in reality, you are demonstrating the idea of trusting the
mm,
process, right? And saying
very
like, hey,
much.
we're gonna go step by step, and
Hmm.
then this is gonna take us to a better place than if we just ignore
Right,
the tools
right.
and the process. And I
Yeah,
think that's very important.
yeah,
And
yeah.
just to highlight something interesting about that experience is that I remember that few weeks ago you and I were talking about culture, and when Jennifer Katongole gets um, interested on something, she is relentless, and she's like,
Mm,
Carlos, I want to learn more about you know continuous improvement culture. And I just, when you were doing medic, I think I told you like, this is it. Like, you're
yeah, this is
with
the real
the
one.
some of the most influential people in the organization, and you're asking them to do Kaizen, and I think that's going to have a ripple effect in the organization from a cultural standpoint. And I was very impressed by all these leaders that were talking the language of continuous
Yeah,
improvement, and they were
yes.
teaching really others continuous improvement without really doing it in a kind of classroom setting, which to
Right.
me is more powerful.
Yes, I think so. Because we had to give updates, right? We needed to report back to the org what were we busy with, what stage we're at. So when people start hearing that more and more, it's like, oh, well, of course this is the way we solve problems. Like this makes sense. And when you talk about culture too, I know both you and I, when we facilitate, we kind of set Kaizen rules of this is how we're going to act. And so I think even the act of doing
Mm,
that, of being like,
mhm,
when we are in this space, this is how we behave. Like most other
mm,
meetings, you don't do that. You just kind of go into the meeting and start talking. And so I think that sets the tone differently. And then I think also knowing like some of these sessions were stressful, and these are people who understand the weight of needing to figure this out. And also, you can maybe tell my sparkling personality that like I like to have fun when we're doing Kaizen too. So I would always start off our sessions with like a fun question or like put a GIF in the chat
mm,
of how you're feeling or like 9 llamas, which llama represents you today. And I'm just
mm,
like guessing the average CFO does not start his morning telling you what llama he looks like today. But it just kind of helps to create more like, hey, there's some levity in this. We can be friends. We can figure this out together. And so I think
mm.
that part of culture matters as well.
It's funny you're touching on that because I was just talking to Claudia, my wife, about
Mm.
how difficult it is to follow the rule of have
Ah.
fun. And it's I'm not kidding. Depending on the culture, because you know
Mm.
we've done kaizens with different cultures,
Sure.
and it just fascinating that for some cultures it's really difficult to be intentional about the fun part. And so that's why, designing these experiences, like you said, with the fun aspect, because we all like to have fun.
Yeah,
Sometimes we
exactly.
just, yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
And
Yep.
so making it that, and especially again in a virtual setting, it's
Mm.
super important. So I agree with that. Well, but here's a question for you: is what's for you next? What are some of the things that you see coming in the future where you
Yeah.
feel like you can use
Mm.
and expand the idea of continuous improvement?
Yeah. Yeah. Let me tie two things together. So one, when we talk
Hmm.
about culture, is also how we grow in medical teams, and our continuous improvement culture always builds on the past things. So one thing that I think
Mm,
that has been a good kind of launch pad for us this year is that in May we had continuous improvement week. And so we had 4 days of
yeah.
sessions where people were talking about their improvements. I think there's like 35 staff presented about improvements
Mm,
they'd worked on either this year or
mm,
in past years. We were taking people to Gemba via video, like literally showing them like, hey, this is where we're serving refugees. And so what so encouraged me out of that was the number of people who participated in the week and were like giving shout outs to each other on teams of like, hey, thanks so and so for working on this. Thanks so and so for
mhm,
working on this. But we had so many signups for our white belt course, which is our new course.
mm,
And we actually got all 7 of our country offices represented, which was the first time that ever
mm,
happened. And so as I look ahead now to the next fiscal year, I'm like, okay, now I know that we have CI champions in every office. And so that's really where I want to
mm,
pour into this next year, particularly now living in Uganda. I'm in closer time zones to a lot of our countries. And so working on how can I connect with those CI champions? How can we continue to develop them, taking them through yellow belt, green belt trainings, but also making sure they have those skills to run their own improvement projects. Because I very much see my role as a coach. It's not me who needs to project manage things all the time. So I really want to
mm,
encourage them because I do think that, of course, there's always things to work on at a headquarters level, but the real impact can also happen when you're actually down at the health facility level. So I think that's going to be really exciting. I think one of the challenges we have is we have country offices of varying maturities. So we have,
mm,
one that's been around more than 15 years and then ones that have been around for 3 years. That's very different. And so it's also kind of changing mindsets too to say like you don't just do continuous improvement once you're settled. It's like actually even in those kind of more hectic situations, the still growing countries, especially that part of standards becomes way more
mhm,
important. And I was talking to someone in Sudan the other day who was saying like, yeah, we have really a lot of staff turnover because some of our contracts are so short that then we have to let staff go,
mhm,
but then we get a new contract and we hire new. So it's like that knowledge retention is not as
mhm,
strong as it needs to be, which is why we need to write down checklists and standards so
mhm,
we can just keep retraining people as we hire them. And
mhm,
so I think that's really important, even in those rapidly expanding countries, is to make sure we're all clear on what it means to be medical teams and do this job, right?
mhm,
Because I think sometimes it's just kind of that oral history. And then some of that will come from the headquarters level too, of, what are some minimum standards we need to have about things? And
mhm,
it's tricky, right? Because on one hand, you don't want to handcuff the country office to say, like, you have to use this exact template if it doesn't
mhm,
necessarily make sense. Like if it's something they're just going to use within their country office. But if there's something, as you said, in the information part, it's an information flow up to HQ, like we can't be receiving information 7 different ways. Like that does not work. So in those
mhm,
cases, those minimum standards need to be more than just guidance. It also needs to be, and here's the
mhm,
template, and here's by what date of the month this will happen. Like we can't just
mhm,
kind of have every office dividing for themselves. So
mhm,
I think there's some good work to be done in that this year as well.
mm. Oh my goodness, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be a fun year for you and medical teams in
Hmm.
that area.
Hmm.
Hey, I could keep talking and learning about you and how you approach things
Sure.
and I just love it. But we have to finish our
Hmm.
podcast. And I always think about in my experience with continuous improvement, there's so many people that sometimes feel stuck that
Yeah.
they people that have the heart of continuous improvement, they have the mindset, even leaders that want good change,
Sure.
they don't know how to get started or they don't know how to
Mm,
approach that. And I think you are a person that have gone through that yourself in terms of wanting to move faster and wanting to achieve more in improvement.
sure.
So, what advice would you give people that are
Mm,
in that place so that
yeah.
they don't feel frustrated and they can start feeling more traction
Hmm.
in this
Hmm.
area of improvements?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a really good point. And I think the phrase start small, like, is always what comes to me because if you try to make, giant action plans and do this big thing and all the hype and then it doesn't move the way you thought, you'll get discouraged and others will get discouraged too. And then you might actually lose some of your credibility because it's like, oh, well, they
Mm,
said they're going to do this thing and they didn't do it. And if it happens again and again, that's really not great. But if you can take something big that you want to work on and break it down to say, like, we're just going to focus on this piece right now, then you can A, be more iterative in your PDCA cycles to see what's working. But B, you build your credibility. And I think, sometimes that discouragement comes even when you have a great idea as someone who wants to see things improve, but maybe your leader doesn't see it the same way or the org's not ready for it. And that can get discouraging.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when you take those smaller pieces, you're also demonstrating to them like, okay, like I hear you, we can't do everything right now, but let me try and work on this. Let me show you how it can change. And then that builds
Mm-hmm.
credibility and trust with them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you want to change things, change is hard. Change is political too. And so I've
Mm-hmm.
found, you have to find your allies. So there's different people I know in the organization who sometimes even, in conversation ask me like, Jennifer, what can I do to help you? Like, is there any message that I can also encourage this person with? Because maybe they're not seeing the same perspective that I have, and I can like, go to bat for this idea as well. And so you do have to know in change management how to influence. Like most CII practitioners I meet are like, oh, this job is all about influence. Like you rarely have the team who's doing the work. You're trying to influence in different areas, which is something I really like. And that's, having been around here a while, it comes a little bit more easier because I know people. But I think too, maybe like in that discouragement piece, a place that where I have found a lot of encouragement is by finding colleagues who also care about this stuff. So then even if it's not a project that you're working on, like maybe what you want to do is kind of stalling, you can come alongside them and like get excited for them or brainstorm with them or coach them if they need it. I do peer coaching with a friend, and so that really helps. And then even on LinkedIn, like I've just met so many people on LinkedIn, and so it's like lovely to log onto your LinkedIn and see all these people sharing improvements and sharing, concepts of CI, and you're like, yeah, this does work. Like, okay, so maybe if I'm having trouble with this one person who doesn't see the vision, like I do know still that like this can work, and there's encouragement there. So yeah, I've just met a lot of people this year through like the Iowa Lean Consortium, Women in Lean, Kata Girl Geeks. And like whenever I go to those meetings, like you're just like, oh, these are my people. And so I would just encourage people, like if you feel like you're alone, like there are people out there and they don't have to live in your time zone. You can connect virtually and they're really lovely and wonderful. So yeah.
I love that. And I think you're extremely good at doing that intentionally and connecting with people. But also, I think when you were sharing this, something I learned is that you take ownership and
Mm,
responsibility about the ideas, and that sometimes is hard. Sometimes we feel like, oh, I had this idea and nobody
mm,
listened to me. But it's also the aspect of, but are you willing to be behind the idea and take
mm.
responsibility and ownership? That sometimes makes the
Sure.
difference for a leader to say, yeah, I support you on that. Yeah.
Very much so.
Great.
Very much so.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for your time and for everything you do in um, for such a great organization. And I just excited just to continue to see your growth and how you continue to impact many people through your work. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you. And you have helped me to grow so much in these last few years too. So I always appreciate our chats. So it's just fun to get to record one of them finally. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
All
Bye
right. Take
bye.
care. Bye.